Good morning. Thank you all for coming out with us or coming on with us today on a rainy, yucky day. I hope everybody is warm and healthy and well. Today we're going to be talking about policy and administrative requirements. And our target audience, everyone is welcome. Well, that's the caveat always. Everyone can come to any of these. But our target audience is really folks who are responsible for COC projects, either as a grantee, a recipient, or a subrecipient. The content for today may not be super relevant for direct, case managers, but it may be helpful. So again, everyone's welcome to stay. We just kind of want to let you know what the next hour and a half is going to bring. So next slide. So Lauren's getting our next slide. So I'll just introduce ourselves quickly. I'm with Lauren Peretti and I am Liz Isaacs. We work for Housing Innovations, and Housing Innovations, one of our jobs is to help staff the BOSS COC. So we do trainings, we monitor, we run steering committee meetings and do all different kinds of things. So we're wearing the hat of trainers today. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. Before I tell you what we're going to talk about, I'll just remind you always, we post the slides are all posted ahead of meetings or trainings, and the recording will be posted hopefully later today. I will try to get that done right away. So please feel free to share the materials with staff, friends, anyone who wants to know about this, but maybe couldn't join today, or you joined today, but it would be helpful to hear another time. Everybody is muted, but we would love to hear questions, comments, concerns. So please unmute yourselves and ask. I mean, even if it were a big crowd, you could do it, but we're especially a small crowd today. And this is for you. This is to be really helpful to you, your agency, your programs. So there are just no dumb questions. There's please just jump in and ask, because we get tired of hearing our own voices and we would love to hear yours. So unmute yourself, put questions in chat. And we'll go from there. So in the agenda, we've already done some welcome and introductions. We want to make sure we've given you an overview of federal and local requirements, of which there are many. So another caveat is we're going to talk about as many as we can. We're going to give you a lot of resources. So our hope, as with really all trainings we do, but that this can serve as a guide for you. So if you're frustrated and can't find something, you can say, oh, wow, I just went to a training and they had a whole bunch of links. We have a lot of links here. So anything that is green and underlined is a live link. So please, use this as a guide, use this as a resource. We're going to talk about something new, a new federal requirement, Buy America preference. We'll talk a little bit about equity and equal access, participants' rights and notices. There are just so many policies. We'll talk about some others. We'll talk about some other administrative requirements, and then suggestions and questions. And again, I'll just reiterate, we'll make sure we get questions at the end, but we would love to hear questions as we go along. Okay. So you're going to hear us talk a lot about recipients and subrecipients. So just so we're on the same page, the recipient is the agency that has the grant agreement, receives the COC funds from HUD. It can be DEMIS, DOH, a public housing authority, or a not-for-profit agency. Then the subrecipient, those are the folks that receive COC funds through a subaward from the recipient, and they're listed on the project application as such. And in CT BOSS, all our subrecipients are not-for-profit agencies. So we're going to get started with a poll so we can see who is here. So I am going to launch this poll, and we are going to ask you what type of COC project you work in and what role your agency plays. And if you guys could answer those questions, and there are 2 of them, that would be great. Give you a minute. And you know what, if you don't know, or if it's other, go ahead, and if you might be new, you might not be sure, feel free to say not sure, and that's fine. we've got a lot of participation there, so I think we're gonna end the poll and share the results so folks can see who's in the room. So we've got a lot of PSH folks. We got rapid rehousing, a little bit of transitional. Go for some youth navigators. Awesome. Welcome, welcome. We got lots of grantees in the room. Oh, street outreach too. Silvio has lots of hats. You're right, Sylvia. Good job there. We've got sub-recipients, service providers, some rental administrators. And if you don't know, feel free to ask us a question and we can help you know, or maybe after this training, you'll have a sense. So thank you for playing along with us. And we will keep moving. So we're going to start, with federal requirements, and then we'll go to local requirements. As I mentioned before, there are many, many requirements, and the federal requirements are all over the place. They live in many, many different websites. So Lauren's fantastic, as usual, and pulled them all together for us. So again, anything green underlined is a live link. And this is where you can find information about a host of things, the interim rule, which kind of governs what we do in the COC, down to YHDP resources. And remember, YHDP folks are part of the COC, so we need to have resources and information for them as well. Right. Now, local requirements. As if federal requirements aren't enough, then we like to give you more local requirements. Again, lots of different rules, a lot going on. So what we're going to encourage you to do to see the CAN policies, the BOSS policies, YHDP requirements, and outreach guidelines. Sylvia's in the room, right? Outreach guidelines. You're going to go to the CT BOSS policies page, where there is lots and lots and lots of information. Lauren and I probably will say this a few times. If you go to the website and there's a broken link, or you can't find something, or something is just not making sense, please reach out to us, because we want it to work for you and we have very thick skin. You cannot offend us. And we really, really want things to work well. Well, you probably can offend us, but not in that way. So we feel really strongly that this is all for you. So if something's not right and it doesn't work for you, please tell us, because we really want to get it right, because we are so mindful that there's a lot going on, and it's not easy to find stuff, and our job is to try to make it easier for you. So we're also going to show you where there's rapid rehousing and PSH guides for you. So in conjunction with DOH, we pulled together this rapid rehousing operations guide. There's a great PSH guide. It has really great answers. I go to it. Our team uses it. Sometimes we're debating a question, or someone will ask us something. It's like, go to the guide and ask. We can't go through it all today, because that would be 2 or 3 different trainings, but we just want to make sure you know where it is. And then I'll also encourage you to go to the CT BOSS training page, because there are so many trainings and it's got really good stuff. And again, if you're there and you can't find something, or something doesn't make any sense, please let us know, and we're happy to make it clear to you. Okay. More resources. So now we're going to encourage you to go to the CT BOSS resources page. Again, I'll stop saying it. Maybe this will be the last time, but green and underlined, you're going to click on that and find a host of forms and checklists. I won't read the whole thing, but it has a lot of good information. It has really what is key to running your projects for PSH, for rapid rehousing, YHDP. It's all there. So just make sure you take a look and see what's there, because it really is, it's helpful. It's all in one place, and we're trying to make it as seamless as possible for you. Monitoring, everyone's favorite topic. So I like that Lauren puts no surprises, because we really do tell people this, and we want you to believe us, which is everything that you're going to be monitored on is in one place, and it's not meant to trick anybody. It's to make sure that everyone knows everything that they need to know for when we come out to monitor. But remember, we're coming out to monitor to make sure that if HUD came out to monitor, there wouldn't be a problem, right? So we try to address issues that could potentially be a problem, but it's really meant to be a learning process. It's transparent. It's supposed to be helpful. So every year we update the monitoring guide. It's posted on the website. And there are a lot of requirements, but what this tries to do is put the most important ones that we think are most important, that we think HUD probably thinks are the most important, all in one place. So check it out, whether or not you're being monitored or not monitored. I think it's a really good tool. And again, it's a great place if you have a question or you're not sure about something, you might actually find the answer there. So this is new. This is a new federal requirement, Buy America preference. So we're going to talk about this for a minute. And I decided that I'm going to do the spoiler alert, which is this probably doesn't apply to many of you. Now, that doesn't mean you stop listening. Everybody has to keep listening. But before anyone's head explodes, there's a good chance that unless you have an operating budget line, this probably doesn't apply to you. But it's interesting. We need to know about it. And if it does apply to you, obviously, it's really interesting. So stay with me, but I did the spoiler alert so that no one's head explodes. So this requires iron, steel, manufactured product, and construction material used in infrastructure projects to be produced right here in the United States. So it's to purchase materials made in America, called the Buy American preference. And as I just said, it only applies to certain activities, and we're going to briefly talk about those activities. Next slide. So the activities, the COC activities that might be relevant are things that are in buildings and real property. So construction, maintenance, repair, things that apply are to construction materials and manufactured products for grants executed on or after August 23rd of 2024. And I'll say it again, just so everybody knows, probably only applies if you have an operating budget line. But if you do, you really do want to pay attention to this. We'll keep talking. Nope. Yes. So this is the good news, right? And Lauren did a great visual. If you have supportive services, rental assistance, or administrative activities, not for you. Not for you. So you don't need to pay attention. But we'll do the next slide. If it does apply to you, you're going to want to make sure, and I certainly am not going to read the slide, but you
actually,
have language.
Liz.
Oh,
sorry. I think this thing, the HUD language is that everyone should do this thing. Doesn't totally
okay.
make sense to me why you would do this thing if you don't have an operating budget line item, but their guidance clearly says that everyone that's got a subrecipient, contractors or vendors, should add this template language into their.
Got it. Look, I'm lying to you. Sorry. I was trying to make it even easier than it should be, but that's just not how it works. Thank you, Lauren. Okay. But it is pretty easy because Lauren put the language right here for you. So everyone needs to do this. All right. So don't listen, not just operating line. Everyone needs to include this, and you want to make sure it's in all your contracts and agreements, because who knows, maybe it will become relevant at some point in time. Okay. Thanks, Lauren. Next slide. And then just continuation of next steps. So you want to go, like we said, make sure that you've updated them with these requirements. And if you do have a budget line item, so this is particularly relevant for you, check out the quick guide. And then it will help you know if it applies to your project, what you need to do, what materials are there, and maybe there's a waiver. And so you just want to make sure, like with all of HUD requirements, that you document everything as like you're supposed to, and to make sure that you're complying with our new requirement. Should I stop there for a second? I'm rambling a lot. I've said a lot of information. Questions?
Yes, and while we're waiting for people to see if they have any questions, I just want to say really quickly, this is probably more likely to apply to your ESG grants, and we know that many of you also have ESG grants, so we also inserted here the ESG BABA quick guide, because if you have an ESG grant, you also want to look at it through that lens.
That's great. That's helpful.
I don't see any hands up or questions in the chat.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit about equity and equal access. So we know that there's a requirement that people who have experienced homelessness are supposed to and should be involved in our projects. So every recipient and subrecipient need to have at least one person with lived experience of homelessness on their board of directors or equivalent policy or governing agency or entity. So this is not an advisory board. So the HUD field office has answered that question. So it's not as if you can create an advisory board in lieu of this. So people with lived experience of homelessness must be there. They should have had experience of homelessness in the last 7 years. And we always recommend that it's not one person, that you have a minimum of 2 people. And that it's not just about being on the board, but that you want folks involved in employment, volunteer services, and have a say in how services are being provided and really are involved and engaged in the project. And we'll keep talking about that on the next slide.
So I just want to say really
Oh,
quickly
yep,
that 7-year thing is not a hard and fast rule,
right.
right? That's not in the regulation. We have just seen in recent years HUD moving in that direction, where when they're asking about lived experience, they're really looking for people who have had lived experience within that time frame. So
Yep.
if you've got somebody on your board and it's not within the 7 years, you are probably still going to be good. We just are kind of in reading the tea leaves here that that is potentially the direction that HUD is heading based upon other things that we have seen.
Great, thank you. So with very good reason, there's been a greater focus on ensuring that both race equity and people with lived experience of homelessness are engaged in our projects. We know it's helpful, it's what's needed, and it's the right thing to do. And so we've listed some examples and opportunities that folks can engage in to make sure that happens. So you want to make sure that you have folks with lived experience of homelessness, folks who identify as BIPOC, folks who identify as LGBTQIA plus in running and operating your projects, as well as being on your board. And what you want to do is look at who's coming for your services and housing. What languages are they speaking? What is their race? What is that? Where is their culture? And then take a look at your board and take a look at your staff and see, is that a reflection of what's happening? And if it isn't, how can it be? How can you better represent the folks that you're actually serving in both your staff and in your governance? And you also want to just make sure that folks have a chance to be part of services, that they get to do consumer surveys or focus groups and let you know their experience in the program. I'm trying to think if I have Lauren had good notes on this. Okay. Also, we want to make sure that you're developing great partnerships with other folks. So what organizations are you partnering with? You want to take a look at program data. So you want to look, for example, are do BIPOC folks in your program have less access to permanent housing? So you might want to look at what do exits look like? And if that's the case, then how can this be addressed? Is it staff training? Is it outreach to landlords? But you really want to look at data as it relates to race equity. And then you just want to make sure that you're looking at all the actions you're taking, all the steps, and you want to say, how do we as an organization better center the experience of BIPOC, people with lived experience of homelessness, LGBTQIA+, so that outcomes are more equitable? I'll stop there too. I said a lot. Anything else? Nope.
Sorry,
Okay.
I'm talking while muted. I don't think so. I don't see anything in the chat, and I think I am picking up now on this next slide.
You are.
So thanks, Liz. A lot of you I see on have been around for a while. You're familiar with the HUD equal access rules. We're going to talk about those in more detail in a minute. Basically, HUD requires, and of course we want to make sure that our programs are accessible to everyone, regardless of their gender, regardless of their marital status, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. We obviously know that folks who identify as LGBTQIA+, unfortunately are still experiencing discrimination and bigotry, and that can make them more susceptible to homelessness, particularly among young people. We know that family rejection because of sexual orientation or gender identity is really quite a significant cause of homelessness. And so we want to make sure that our projects are not just available, but are also affirming to LGBTQIA plus folks. And so to help with that, we have a policy in CT BOSS that outlines kind of what does that mean to be an affirming project. And so the policy requires the things that are on the next couple slides, right? We want to make sure that our staff are using people's chosen titles and names, even when that stuff may not match what's on their identification. We want to, of course, be very mindful of the fact that outing someone can be dangerous and traumatizing, and we never want to disclose information about someone's identity or orientation without their permission. We want to do everything possible to make sure that our projects are safe, but there may be times that are, outside of our control, where particularly client to client bullying, violence, harassment happens. And when that does happen, we want to make sure that we address it and stop it immediately, that we document what happened and how we responded, and that we're linking people. We know, hopefully, luckily in Connecticut, I think this isn't as much of a problem as it is in other places in the country, but it's still a problem. And we want to make sure that all of the providers that we are linking folks to are affirming, and that we listen to people, right? So if they are linked to a provider and that provider is not affirming and not meeting their needs, that we help them to provide a provider who can meet those needs.
Lauren, we do have just some questions, so I
Yeah.
let Mansoor said, what could be an indicator that we are complying, or are there any findings from your monitoring visit that we could use as a lesson?
In monitoring, we've really not seen issues with this stuff in terms of like there being like violence and bullying and all that kind of stuff. And we really just ask in monitoring for you to self-assess whether you're doing these things. So we'll have a conversation about it. And we've not seen a lot of issues here. The one issue we have seen, and we're going to talk about this in an upcoming slide, is really that people have not adopted. The policy does require you to adopt an agency level policy around being a non-discriminatory affirming place. And so we've not necessarily seen uptake in that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And I see the other question there too from Elaine. This is not in conflict with coordinated entry, right? So you're going to take the next person on the by name list, and you're going to take that next person on the by name list regardless of what their gender identity is, right? Like, so this doesn't say that you have to take somebody who's, identifies as trans before you take the next person on the by name list. All right. The policy also requires that if you've got any single access restrooms, meaning, that the restroom is intended to be used by one person at a time, right, that you make those restrooms gender neutral. And that if you've got any gender specific programming, so for example, you have a men's group, right, that access to that group is based upon gender identity, not the gender that it says on somebody's identification. And that finally, if you've got any kind of dress codes at your agency, either for clients or for staff, we want to make those gender neutral. So we don't use terms like women's skirts would be an example of a non-gender neutral dress code. All right, and then so we know that people will choose to stay on the streets if they don't feel safe in our programs, and we certainly don't want that to happen. And we also know that a safe space, right, really is more than just about physical safety, right? It's about what I see, what I hear, and how I'm treated in your program every day. And I know that you guys are doing a great job at this in your programs. And that you're really taking intentional steps to make your programs not just safe, but also affirming, right? You're modeling respectful behavior and appropriate language. For your staff are modeling that for each other, for the tenants. You make sure that people know that they're welcomed and that you're going to take their needs seriously and that you're not going to tolerate any kind of bigotry or discrimination. But again, if that happens, right, that you're going to stop it, right? You're going to stop it. And when you stop it, you're going to focus on the perpetrator and not on the victim, right? So you're not going to make the person who's being discriminated against do anything differently. You're going to work with the perpetrator to understand that what they're doing is not allowed and to stop the behavior. And then, of course, we want to make sure that, and this is required in the policy, that you've got things posted around your sites that signal to people that this is a safe, affirming place where they can be themselves, and that you've got partnerships with providers who are safe, affirming providers, right? So if there's a local LGBTQ center or a healthcare provider, who provides gender transition services, right? That you've got literature about that stuff in your sites, because it really is so important for people who've experienced this kind of bigotry and discrimination to see that, to know that they are safe with you. All right, so we are going to do a quick, oh, wait, did I skip something? I did skip something, sorry. So the thing that I just talked about a moment ago in response to Mansour's question, you are required as part of this policy to adopt an LGBTQIA specific anti-discrimination policy that goes beyond really just saying that you're not going to discriminate, to talk about the ways in which you are going to be affirming proactively. And there's a sample policy. Abby, who many of you know, she used to be part of the HI team, we miss her, wrote a great sample policy. So you guys can just use that sample policy, tweak it as need be for your particular context, and adopt it. And then Abby also has done, for many years now, equal access trainings for us, and those training slides and that recording are also on our website. So check it out if you've not already seen it. All right, so now we are going to do a quick poll. All right, so for each of these things, right, we want to know, and this is totally anonymous, right? So has your agency fully implemented the practice? Have you started to implement it, but are still sort of in the process of implementing it, or have you not yet begun to implement it? And this is not like to evaluate or anything. It's really just for you all to be able to see for yourselves and for each other where other agencies are on each of these things. So we'll give you a couple minutes to respond to the poll, and then we'll look at the results together. All right, I'm going to give about a couple more seconds, and then I'm going to end the poll. We've got a real good response rate. All right, I am going to end the poll and share the results. So good news, which is what I expected. You can see that for the most part, agencies have either are in the process of implementing or have already fully implemented the practices here. If you answered not yet begun on one of these things, that's okay, right? You just want to make sure that these might be things that you're going to follow up on after today's training to make sure you get that ball rolling. I will say on the first one, getting somebody with lived experience of homelessness on your board of directors, this is something that HUD takes very seriously. It is something that we see them monitor on. So and we know that it's hard, right? We know in some cases, like you're really trying to get someone, you're just having difficulty recruiting. But if you've not yet begun that, really, I would prioritize getting on that one. Let me just see if there's anything else here to call out. It looks like almost all of you have made your single access restrooms available to people of all genders. So go Connecticut. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing and go on to the next slide. So the HUD allows us to, and we want to make sure that our COC programs are available to people experiencing homelessness regardless of what their immigration status is. And so CT Boss, a number of years back, adopted a policy that says that if your agency is not required federally to verify immigration status, you will not do so for your COC projects. And so basically what the federal law says is that nonprofits are not required to verify immigration status for your COC applicants, right? And so the HUD policy says that because you're not required to, you're not going to do it. And so the bottom line is that nonprofits and BOSS should not be verifying immigration status, and people should be able to access our COC funded programs regardless of their immigration status. HUD has also said that even if you're a government agency, right, they've determined that rapid rehousing assistance is not subject to immigration-based restrictions, and that you've got to provide transitional housing regardless of immigration status. So, and if anyone at your agency has questions about this, we've put a link to communication directly from HUD about this so that you don't have to believe me. It's here at this link, and we're also happy always to talk to people if there are questions. So, all right, and I think if just for monitoring, I think most of you are doing this. We rarely see issues with this. So you are also required to have a non-discrimination policies, or really a set of non-discrimination policies if you get COC funding as either a recipient or a subrecipient. And you should have those policies for applicants for employment, for actual employees, for people who are applying for your services, and for people that you are actually serving. So the biggest problem we see here is when we come out and monitor, you've got employment non-discrimination policies, but not non-discrimination policies that apply to your services. And you want to make sure that you've got the full set of non-discrimination policies, that you say in your policies that you're in full compliance with, federal non-discrimination laws, with fair housing laws, equal opportunity in housing and employment, and reasonable accommodations, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And that you do not discriminate based upon religion. So, and then these are the HUD equal access requirements that have been in place for a long time that we talked about before. There's that training we referenced before that Abby did. So basically, our programs have got to be open to all eligible individuals, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status, right? And the HUD definition of family is a very beautiful definition of family. It basically says that family is who we think family is, right? So my family is whoever I identify as being a part of my family. So we don't have to be married, we don't have to be blood related, and Liz and I identify as part of the same family. We can get served together in a COC project as a family, and we cannot be separated because of age or gender of we can't be separated because we're two women, right? We can't be separated. We can't take in any HUD funded program, you can't take even shelters, right? You can't take men and say that the men have to be served differently in a separate program from the women. We can't say we're only going to serve women with children or at all, or we're only going to serve children under a certain age. That is not allowable in any kind of federally funded project. And we want to make sure that when possible, right, CANs are always going to be referring families, hopefully, to projects that have units for families and services for families. That's not always going to be possible, right? We know that the inventory doesn't always precisely match the need. And so if you are a scattered site project, you are going to serve all eligible households that are referred to you by your CAN, assuming you have enough money in your budget to do that, right? So if you've got, don't really have many or any family units in your budget, and the CAN refers a six member household to your program, you may not have enough money in your budget to rent a unit that's large enough. So in that case, you're going to go back to the CAN and say, hey, there's been some kind of mistake here. We need to refer this someone to someone else. But generally speaking, you're going to try to serve everyone that is referred by your CAN. And you don't have to worry about, like in your HUD application, it says you're going to serve X number of families and X number of singles. You don't have to serve precisely those numbers, right? HUD recognizes that these things are moving targets, right? I might be a single today and I, get married, or I meet a girlfriend, or I have a baby, right? So family composition, life happens, things can change, and HUD recognizes that. So you don't have to worry about being out of compliance with your contract because you're doing that. All right. So the equal access requirements also require that projects not be limited based on gender unless you meet one of two criteria. Either you've got a shared bathroom situation or you've got shared sleeping accommodations. And it's important to remember that by shared bathroom, it doesn't mean there's a single, bathroom that's meant for one person to be used at a time, but multiple people share that single bathroom. It means that the bathroom itself is literally intended to be, it's a 4-stall bathroom, right? That's what shared bathing means. So if that is the case, you've got, a multi-stall bathroom, then you can limit by gender. Or if you've got people who are sharing the same room that they're sleeping in, right? There's roommates, there are 2 people in a room, that can be limited by gender. But otherwise, you cannot limit HUD programs based on gender. You cannot say we serve only women or we serve only men. All right, do we have any questions before I? Okay. So, and then, I think I said this already, we want to accommodate changes in people's family size unless we don't have a unit that's big enough, right? So in a congregate project, right, your units are, maybe they're all 1 bedrooms or they're all efficiencies, right? You're not going to serve a 4-person family there, right? That's going to be the most common reason why you're allowed not to accommodate changes in family composition, even after they've already entered your project. And you're gonna, when that happens, right, you're gonna help the person to either move to a different unit if you're a scattered site unit, if you're a scattered site project, or if you're a congregate project, maybe help them to connect to the CAN to find another project that can accommodate them and do a, sort of project to project transfer at the CAN level. All right. So fair housing. I'm sorry, catch up here on my slides. So fair housing is a federal law. Obviously, there are also Connecticut laws that around fair housing, and basically together, those 2 laws, federal and Connecticut, prevent discrimination in housing on the basis of all of these things that are listed on this slide under the first bullet. I am not going to read to you all of those things, but in Connecticut, you've got a very broad, because Connecticut has statutes that go beyond the federal statute. So all of these different groups that are listed in this first bullet cannot be discriminated against in housing. HUD has, we know that in the United States, people of color are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. And so what HUD has said is that a policy that limits housing based on criminal justice involvement has a discriminatory impact, even if that is not the intent and is therefore not allowed. So if you've got a policy that says we don't rent to anybody that has a felony conviction, for example, that's going to have the impact of having a discriminatory effect on people of color. And so that is not allowed. And we're going to talk more about some specific examples of that in a moment, but first we are going to talk about affirmatively furthering fair housing. So HUD also often requires, and we talk about this whenever we come out and monitor, that projects are, that you are affirmatively marketing your project to the people who are least likely to apply in the absence of that special outreach, right? So that means things like you are, doing outreach to disability communities, right? You're doing outreach to communities that have high prevalence of people of color. You're doing outreach maybe if there are religious minority communities in your jurisdiction, right? That you're affirmatively making sure that those communities know about and can access your programs, that you're maintaining records of those programs, and that if when you are out and about, helping people get housing, you encounter a violation of fair housing, right? A landlord says to you, we don't rent to people with children, we don't rent to people that don't speak English, right? If you encounter those fair housing violations, you report them. And you are required to report them to the entity that is in charge of your con plan. For many of you, that's going to be the State Department of Housing because they are in charge of the con plan for the entire state. If you live in a bigger town or city in Connecticut, then there might be a local agency that is in charge of your own local con plan. If you don't know who your con plan agency is, call Liz or I, and we will help you figure it out. But you have got to report those to the con plan jurisdiction. And you also, probably want to report it to the HUD Fair Housing complaint line, which we will talk about in a minute. And then the other affirmatively furthering fair housing requirement is that you are telling people what their fair housing rights are and what they can do if they experience a fair housing violation. And so as long as you are giving people the Bill of Rights, you are doing that because that information is included in the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights is linked here on this slide. So what does this mean in practice for us? We want to make sure that, all of our, if we're denying somebody from housing, that the reason that we are denying them is documented and that it's a reason that is compliant with fair housing, right? I see Deanna put a question, so I'm going to take it. What about property management that does not take people with felony convictions? Excellent question, Deanna. I'm glad that you raised it. That is not allowed. We cannot have property managers in our COC properties that are not following housing first, right? So I'm going to talk about two things. First, I'm going to talk about congregate COC housing, right? Those projects have got to follow not just this fair housing stuff, but also housing first, right? So our congregate PSH housing should not have property managers in it that are saying, we don't take people with felony convictions, we don't take people with bad credit, we don't take people with evictions, right? Not allowed in congregate PSH. If you've got that situation happening in your CAN, please let us know and we will follow up directly with that property manager to make sure that they understand their obligations and are in compliance with fair housing. The other thing is then the scattered site landlords, right, which is the bulk of our inventory in CT BOSS. In scattered site, right, they are not necessarily bound. The landlord is not bound to our housing first requirements, but they are bound to federal fair housing law, right? So scattered site landlords are in violation of federal fair housing if they are saying to people, we don't take anybody with a felony conviction in the last 5 years. They may not have blanket policies related to criminal records. Now they can do what HUD calls individualized and detailed assessments. So they can look individually at somebody's record, right? Their background check, and make an individualized assessment that in order to keep that property safe and their residents safe, right, that they are not going to be able to serve that person, but they have to do that on an individual level, and they may not look at arrests. You can't consider arrests, you can only consider convictions, okay? So I think there's probably a lot of educating we need to do, both with our scattered site landlords and with our congregate property managers, and we are here to help you. So please let us know how we can help. And then,
Lauren?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The policy that we have, and I want to make sure it's not violating anything, is we don't have a blanket policy. This is about not about like entry into the housing, but entry into our case management, because our case managers typically work alone. And we look at the history, a deep dive into the history, and to see if there is a persistent, unaddressed pattern of violent behavior that might put our staff at risk. Not like the person is not seeking help, they've told us they're not interested. And it is like they don't have any time out of jail showing that they're not in trouble again. Like, and that would, we wouldn't want our staff to be serving alone. They could bring someone else, but they will have, they can't even like comfortably cite them. I just, and it's very rare. This is a rare thing. But
Yeah, so I do think,
like,
I mean, I do think that that's a reality, right? There are, you know, folks that we need our help who have, and this is rare, right? This is, you know, most people, we know that, you know, folks with mental illness and folks who are experiencing homelessness, right, are more likely to be victims of violent crime than they are to be perpetrators of violent crime, right? This is not in any way, we're not trying to stigmatize people, right? It's rare, but it does happen that there's somebody that has a very serious, persistent, unaddressed problem that is that given the way that your programs are funded and structured, you may not be able to have your staff safely work with that person. So obviously the first thing is to try to figure out, is there a way, like, can we admit that person and, you know, work with them differently than how we normally work with people? So we're only going to send 2 people out. We're not going to go into the unit. We're only going to meet with them in a public place. We want to do all those things to try and get to the yes, we can help you, right? If that is just not possible, then we want to refer that person to the CAN and see like what collectively we can do. But certainly it is allowable for you to have policies and procedures in place that help to ensure that the people who work for you are safe in their jobs. All right, so questions. I think our PSH programs with RAP certs through JDA does not allow those on the sex offender registry unless this has changed. Is this allowed? So good question. So where there is a property, so if there is a property and based upon the local, you know, the Connecticut statute, I'm sorry, I don't know all the details of the Connecticut statute, but a lot of places have laws that say a sex offender can't live within, you know, 200 yards of a school, let's say, right? Then that's the law, right? You can't place a sex offender within 200 yards of the school. So if your building isn't within 200 yards of the school, then you shouldn't be, then you know, you can't violate the law. But you know, given what Sylvia just said, there may also be circumstances, right, where given the individualized nature of this person's history and their current issues, right, you're not going to place that person in a project with young children, let's say, right? So there may be times when you're not going to serve a sex offender because of those things, but generally speaking, we don't want blanket policies that say we don't ever work with sex offenders are not going to be permissible. And if you want, I see that the question is specific to JDA and the RAP program, so we're happy if you want to give us more specific examples to take that to DOH to make sure that DOH is aware and enforcing the requirements with their subcontractors. So, all right. Fair housing. So I am not, wait, did I cover all this? Sorry, I think I did not. Sorry, let me go back. So so you want to make sure that that ideally your CAN is documenting that they're doing this affirmative outreach. It doesn't make sense in our current state that every individual project is doing this. I will tell you, if HUD comes out to monitor you, it is still in the regulation that this is an individual project by project responsibility. So if there's a finding on it, you're the ones that are going to be on the hook for the finding, not the CAN. We know that the CANs are overburdened. There's a lot of things that the CANs are trying to do. If there's any way possible that the CAN can be doing these things, I think that is certainly the ideal circumstances, because if HUD comes out and monitors, you're going to need documentation that it is happening. So, all right, I think I covered everything else already on that slide. So the next slide, so I'm not a fair housing expert. These folks at Connecticut Fair Housing Center are fair housing experts. That's their whole job. And they've got great training and great information. So connect with them. If you've got really super detailed questions about fair housing, they can help. We want to talk quickly about reasonable accommodation. So basically, a reasonable accommodation is a request by somebody with a disability for you to do something that's different than what you normally do, because they need you to do that thing because of their disability, right? So an example is you've got somebody who's on psychotropic medications. Those psychotropic medications make them more vulnerable to the heat and heat-related illness. And so because of that disability, they need a higher utility allowance in the summer so that they can pay for a higher air conditioning bill, right? That would be a reasonable accommodation request. Generally speaking, you want to honor reasonable accommodation requests, right? And you want to honor them whether somebody gave you something in writing that specifically said, I'm making a reasonable accommodation request, or they said to you, I need this thing because of my disability, right? They might not call it a reasonable accommodation. They might not put it in writing. That doesn't change your obligations under the law. You want to try to accommodate it if possible. So there are times when you're not going to be able to accommodate it, right? So I'm not going to go through all of the examples on this slide, but it's also possible for people, well, I'll use the example I already gave, right, about the higher utility allowance. So it may be that you are like spent, you know what I mean? You've got no more money in your budget. You just don't have space in your budget to add that expense. That would be a reason that you would be allowed not to accommodate the request. So basically the HUD rules are that if making the accommodation would present an undue financial or administrative burden or cause a fundamental alteration in your program, you are not required to accommodate. So for example, if somebody's like got, very serious, medical ADL needs, and they need somebody full-time to live with them, right, to help manage those needs, and they ask you to pay for that, you're not going to be able to do that, right? It's not in your budget. It's also not it's not the kind of program that you are, right? So that would be a fundamental alteration in your program. You are not a skilled nursing facility, right? So you don't have to accommodate a request for a full-time nurse. You can ask for documentation of the disability. You should not ask for documentation of the disability if you already know someone's disabled, because you already have that documentation, like in a PSH program. Or if it's obvious, right? The person's blind, you can see that they're blind, you're not going to ask for documentation of the blindness. The documentation of the disability requirements follow the same rules as the PSH disability verification. So the documentation does not have to be from a medical doctor. It can be from anybody who's licensed by the state to diagnose and treat the disability. So if you're a social worker, you can't sign off on a medical disability because you're not, as a social worker, licensed to diagnose and treat the disability. So same rules. All right. So these are the other these are other requirements that you have under federal law for making sure that your projects are accessible to people with disabilities. Obviously, physical accessibility, right? So you're subject to all the ADA requirements, Americans with Disability Acts, in terms of like, ramps and accessible bathrooms and all of that kind of physical plant stuff. You're also subject to rules around making sure that you're communicating effectively with people with disabilities. So that includes things like if somebody needs a sign language interpreter, and it also includes this, which is our next slide. You've got to make sure that your website and all of your electronic documents, so any documents that are posted to your website for download, any documents that you are sharing with people electronically, all of those have to be accessible to people with visual impairments. And the good news is that the Microsoft Office suite makes this fairly easy. The main thing is you want to make sure, like, for example, if you're doing a document in Word, right, rather than manually making the document look pretty by bolding and coloring text, that you use the built-in headers feature in Word, that you use the built-in bullets features, and that makes the document so that somebody that's reliant on a screen reader because they're visually impaired, the screen reader is going to be able to recognize those things and interpret those things for the user. So 2 things I'll say about this. There's a whole training, there's a bunch of resources, but we know that you're super busy, right? So if you don't have time to watch the whole training, look at the link all the way at the bottom. It's called Simple Steps to Create Accessible Materials. You'll be well on your way to being compliant if you just do the things that are on that document. And then the second thing is that make sure that whoever's responsible for the website at your agency knows that the website has got to be accessible, and is taking steps to make sure that the website is Section 508 compliant. All right. So we also are required to make sure that our projects are accessible to people who do not speak great English. And so basically what you have to do is assess, right? How often, this is going to be totally dependent upon where you're located and whether or not there are folks in your area that a lot of folks in your area that need services in other languages or not, and what resources are available. So you're going to assess that. And then you're going to determine based upon that assessment, okay, what do we need to do? Like what are the reasonable steps that we're going to accommodate, that we're going to take in order to accommodate the language needs that exist? So that could be doing an inventory of all of your staff to see who's bilingual in different languages so that you can call on those people to interpret if needed. Lots of agencies are using telephone-based interpreter services. Another best practice certainly is to have procedures for when you're going to use informal interpreters versus professional interpreters, right? It's always better to use a professional interpreter. And we always want to try to avoid using children to interpret unless it's an emergency. So you don't want the children of your clients to have to play that role of interpreter unless it's an emergency. And there's a sample policy that you can adopt here, as well as, if you love to read hundreds of pages of HUD guidance, a very lengthy HUD document that outlines in excruciating detail all of the requirements on this topic. Okay, we're going to do a quick Zoom poll, and then I am going to turn it back over to Liz. While we're waiting for Liz to get the Zoom poll up, are there any questions? There we go. All right. So we'll give you couple, this is short one, so we'll give you a real, actually no, this is 4 questions. We'll give you a few minutes to do this and then we'll keep going. All right, we're running a little bit behind, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Don't worry if you didn't get to them all. We're going to go over the results together. So the first question, can an agency have a client advisory committee instead of having somebody with lived experience of homelessness on their board? The answer to that question is no. HUD has been very specific that it's got to be somebody on the board or on an equivalent policy-making entity. So unless that body has the authority to overrule the board, which advisory committees generally do not, that is not allowable. The second question, is it a fair housing violation if a landlord refuses to rent to somebody because of an arrest? Yes. Landlords cannot consider arrests. They can only consider evictions in deciding whether or not somebody's criminal background will prevent them from accessing a unit. Third, are both the recipient and the subrecipient agencies required to ensure accessibility of electronic documents? Yes. And finally, is it always illegal to deny a request for a reasonable accommodation? The answer to that is no. There may be cases where you can deny the reasonable accommodation. You always want to try to accommodate it if you can, but if you can't, either because it's not in your budget or it's going to be an undue administrative burden or substantially alter the fundamental, kind of program that you are, like the skilled nursing facility that we talked about earlier, you do not necessarily have to accommodate every single reasonable accommodation request that you get. All right, Liz.
Sorry about that. Too much clicking going on. A lot of clicking this morning. So we're talking about policies. There is you're required to have a grievance policy and let folks know, including when someone's being terminated. You also want to make sure that there is a staff person who's assigned to help folks navigate the process for a grievance policy. Lauren, are we also talking here? I apologize, my notes are off on this. We're just talking about tenant grievance policy here. Sorry. Because CT Boss also has a grievance policy about where providers and others can come to grieve something, but we're just talking about tenants here. Sorry about that. A little off there. Okay. All right, next slide. We have to close. Too much clicking again. So this tells us a little bit more about grievance. So COC projects and CANs must document that you have given everybody the grievance notice, and you need to make sure that you've reviewed it, and so that people really understand their rights. Because, and we know, like Lauren said, we have such great providers. You want to make sure that people know their rights, but it's really important that they understand what their rights are. And if you want to know more about the BOSS grievance process, we have slides and we have a recording of a training on this. Okay. So the emergency transfer notice, so this is new. This was just adopted by the steering committee in September. And all CANs and COC ESG funded projects are required. So this is important at application, project entry, and annual certification to make sure that everyone knows about what their rights are, regardless of DV survivor status. And to go through the emergency transfer plan and to provide some kind of very readable, easy to use notice so that folks understand what's going on. And the spirit behind all of this is, a lot of it sounds very bureaucratic, and notices and postings, those things are really important. But what's really very important too is that everyone understands them, right? So some people may have literacy issues. They may just do better sitting down and talking to someone. So all the things we're talking about, we really just hope the spirit is that folks can leave whatever the meeting was or whatever the annual requirement is, knowing about grievances and knowing about the emergency transfer policies. Okay. Also, speaking of important, I see we have a question before I go to the next. Is there an appeal policy for someone that's denied entry to a program, or is it the same as the grievance policy? Lauren, do you want to talk
So
about?
what policy you're going to follow depends upon what kind of program it is. So Demas has its own appeals/grievance policy. So if you're a Demas PSH program, you're going to follow that policy. There's a slightly different, although mostly the same policy if you're a rapid rehousing project. And then if for other kinds of projects, you're going to follow just the straight up CT BOSS policy, and all of that is outlined in the slides for the training that Liz just did. And if you have any questions or your participants have any questions about what procedure, what grievance process is accessible to them, just let Liz or I know, and we'll help you. We'll walk you through it. But basically, the answer is yes. Anybody that is denied entry into a program has access to a grievance process.
Absolutely. Okay. We have an updated Bill of Rights, and what we've been trying to do in really all our documentation and trying to be mindful is to make sure that when we're communicating to anyone, whether it's a provider, the community at large, people with lived experience, anyone that we're just using simple language, that we're being really clear, concise when we can be concise, we can't always be, but so we've updated the Bill of Rights to make it super readable. If you haven't checked it out, please check it out. And yeah, there it is. And again, well, we'll talk about it in the next slide. We just really want to make sure that this is shared with everyone. So as I just mentioned before, I'm sorry, I'm just clicking and moving things, that folks get the participant Bill of Rights, the emergency transfer, and the grievance policies. You don't need to use the document we provide, but you have to in some way have a way to show that you've documented this. And again, the spirit of all of this is that folks know their rights, they know how they can grieve. And again, we know that our providers are so awesome that you want to make sure that your clients are having the best experience possible. So it's just really important that you sit down, make sure everyone has these, and you do the proper documentation to make sure that's happened. And so that someone coming in knows that you have done that. Great. So another really, really important thing are educational rights, because we know that folks getting access to housing really can help stopping intergenerational poverty and homelessness. And so we want to make sure, and I know folks who are serving families know this, and children and youth, that it's really important that folks have rights under, well, McKinney-Vento, now it's the Every Student Succeeds Act. And so these PDF has information for parents. We have it in English and Spanish, and information for school-age youth, both in English and Spanish. And just, again, making sure people know what their rights are, and how, we'll talk about the next slide, how kids can get to school and have all the other important rights. Next slide. We'll talk. So we want to make sure, I won't read all of these, but it's really important that kids can get to their school of origin. And then it's really important that they have advocates, and that you have a staff person who's in charge of this, who's making sure and connecting with the schools, so that kids can get the education that they deserve and that they need. And you're going to adopt the CT BOSS sample policy or a similar policy that has all those elements in it. I'll pause there for a sec. Questions, comments? Not seeing anything. Okay, so we're going to keep going and talk about a few more policies before we finish up. So confidentiality is really, really important. If you think about it for yourself, it's probably important for your information, but we know that the folks that we have worked with have suffered a lot of indignities, including a lot of their business being out in the world for people to know. And we just don't need that in the programs. So we want to make sure that you are protecting the confidentiality of your tenants, clients, as much as possible. So your agency is in charge of deciding what HIPAA compliance is for you. We're not going to look at that, but you definitely want to do that. But at a real minimum, you want to always make sure that records containing information are kept secure. and that information is handled, just in an appropriate manner, in a manner you would want someone to handle your private information. And you don't want, also, we want to tell you this because it happens to us more frequently than we'd like. Please don't ever email us information, confidential information, people's names, social security numbers, and you shouldn't ever do that in Zengen, which is our database, or in Dropbox. So you may be monitored, and Lauren might say, please give me this information. You don't want to give us identifying information. We want to just make sure that we're always, always, always thinking about confidentiality. Okay. All right. Drug-free workplace. I'm not going to read all of this, but we just want to make sure that you know about this requirement. The details are here, but you just want to make sure you have a policy. You want to make sure that includes everything on this slide. And then you want to make sure that signage is available for everyone to see so that they know that it is a drug-free workplace. Okay. And we just want to make sure that you know that recipients and sub-recipients need to do these things. You need to notify HUD in writing within 10 days after receiving a notice of an employee's drug abuse conviction, establish an ongoing drug-free awareness program to make sure that all of your staff know about dangers of drug abuse, the policy of maintaining this, and then you want to make sure that people know about what drug counseling is available, rehab, or other employee assistance programs, and then also the penalties that can be imposed for drug abuse violations that do occur in the workplace. Okay. Code of conduct. You want to make sure that you have a code of conduct. So that's really important, and that they have to meet the HUD requirements. And you probably, or many of you know this, right? It needs to be filed with HUD. And HUD sometimes, I don't know, every 5 or 7 years, they wipe them all out and say they don't have them anymore. And so just go and make sure. You can, again, click on the live link to make sure that HUD does have your code of conduct on file. And if you want to see more about this and understand about the minimum requirements, you can click on that link at the bottom. Okay. Conflict of interests. This is really important, that you have a conflict of interest policy and that folks really know what it means to have a conflict of interest. So the example here is that a staff of an agency owns a property, so they can't conduct rent reasonableness determinations or housing quality inspections for that property. The policy is for everyone. So it's for employees, agents, consultants, officers, folks on your board. And it's just important that folks really think about this, right? There's no financial interest or benefit from any kind of activity on the staff's part for doing the work here. And what Lauren had pointed out is that a common finding is that it extends to 1 year beyond your tenure. So if you've left, so you were working as a housing specialist, when you leave, you cannot set up a personal property management business and then use all your contacts from landlords that you worked with. And you need to wait 1 full year if that's something you were going to do. So you kind of need to be mindful and think about that scenario as well. Okay. I handed it over to you, Lauren.
So HUD also requires that you've got something in writing in a policy that says that you're going to follow the written standards that were adopted by the COC. What we've done for as many of these things as we can to try to make it easier for you guys, because we know that this is a lot, we've adopted these things into our operations guide. So most of you don't have to worry about this, because if you're a PSH or a rapid rehousing project, we've already done this for you in the operations guide. If you're another kind of project, you just want to make sure that you've got in your policy somewhere that says that you are going to follow the written standards of the COC. All right, so next thing, again, we've incorporated all of this into the operations guide for both PSH and rapid rehousing. And so you don't need to do anything because we've already done it for you. If you are another kind of project that's using rental assistance or leasing dollars, which is hardly any of you, maybe, then you would need to, in your own written policies and procedures, adopt how you're going to be doing rent reasonableness determinations. You can probably pretty close to just lift what we've done in the operations guide, if you're not already covered by those guides. All right. Again, this is another thing that we have incorporated into the operations guide. So you only need to worry about this if you are not a PSH or a rapid rehousing project. We are not doing an eligibility training today. That's way too much information. We did an entire eligibility training. That webinar is on our website. So for today, just suffice to say that if you are not a PSH or a rapid rehousing project, you need to have adopted in your written policies a written intake procedure. And there is a sample here that you can use. So we've made it hopefully easy for you. And that policy has got to say that you follow the HUD required order of priority for obtaining homeless documentation, which is first you're going to try and get that documentation from a third party. If you cannot do that, you will use intake worker observation. And if you can't do either of those things, neither of those things are available, that in limited circumstances, you can accept self-certification. And we've done a handout that goes through all of the rules around self-certification, so that if you're not sure when self-certification is allowed and when it's not allowed, check out the link on number 3 here, and that should help to explain it to you. And again, if you want to know more information about your eligibility documentation requirements, check out that webinar that Shannon and I did. So the next thing, COVID has made it super obvious, I think, to all of us, how important it is for our programs to be prepared for and to respond to emergencies. And so there is a requirement that agencies have an emergency and disaster preparedness and response plan. And so the things on the next couple of slides are the things that you want to make sure are included in your written plan. The first thing is to assess, what are the kinds of things that we need to be prepared for? You're not going to be able to have a written plan for every single kind of emergency that could possibly happen, right? That is not a requirement. But if you're located in a flood zone, right, you do want to make sure that you have a plan for a flood. So that's really what the risk assessment is like, which are the kinds of things that make sense given where we're located, right? If you are located within the evacuation zone of a nuclear power plant, right, you want to make sure that you've got a plan that, addresses that kind of emergency. And that included in your plan is, who's responsible for coordinating with the relevant partners, right? Including but not limited to, in a public health emergency, your local health department, in all kinds of disasters and emergency, your local emergency management folks. Every county, town is going to have somebody that is designated as kind of the emergency management coordinator. You should know who that is and be in touch with them in any kind of emergency. And that you've got protocols to minimize the impact of losses on material things, including your charts and your records. So a great way to do that is to make all of your charts and records electronic and have those things backed up and protected by good IT infrastructure against spyware and viruses and all of that stuff. But then also making sure that, in most cases we want to, because our services are critical services, right? They're services that people depend upon for, important things. And so whenever possible, we want to try to continue our services throughout the disaster, throughout the emergency. That may not always be possible. So in the case that it's not possible, you want to make sure that the plan addresses getting those services back up and running as quickly as possible, prioritizing the things that are, the most critical for the people that we serve. And And then obviously we know that one of the most important things about managing an emergency situation is how we are communicating with people. You know, when we don't communicate well, things start to run through the rumor mill and there's all kinds of misinformation that gets out. People start to panic, right? So we want to make sure that we've got a communication plan. You know, who's going to be responsible for communicating, you know, for determining what the message is, and then for communicating that message to staff, to clients, you know, to your surrounding community that might rely on you, to whomever the important partners are in your local context. And then we also want to make sure that, you know, once the emergency is over, right, you know, though we are still obviously managing COVID, the emergency part of it is over, to really debrief about like what went well with that, what didn't go well, what are we going to do next time, and what lessons did we learn that it makes sense to incorporate into our written emergency preparedness and response plan. And then with any kind of plan, right? Like you can have a plan, but it does you no good if no one knows that it exists or no one knows what's in it, right? So you want to make sure that the key staff who are responsible for executing the plan, that they understand what their responsibilities are and they know what to do if there's an emergency. So you're not scrambling to try to do that after the emergency happens. You're prepared to do that always on any given day. All right, so the next set of things are sort of similar, but they're specifically related to infection control protocols. You guys did, I can't sing your praises enough about the amazing work that providers in Connecticut did around COVID. You know, we were, I think, very fearful, all of us, that, you know, COVID was going to have, you know, devastating impacts for people with, you know, who were homeless, and it did. I'm not saying that it didn't, but for the most part, you kept people safe and they weren't dying in droves of COVID, right? Like that you managed the situation, you know, as best as the resources would allow. And we learned a ton, right, from that experience. And so, you know, we know that COVID is with us for the long haul and that there are going to be other public health crises, right? We had COVID, then we had monkeypox. There are going to be more things. And so we want to make sure, similar to what we were talking about, emergencies like floods, we want to do the same thing on the public health side to make sure that we've got protocols that align. You know, we're not public health experts. Most of you probably are not public health experts. But we want to make sure that we are communicating with our public health experts and have protocols that are aligned in whatever they're telling us we should do in terms of symptom screening and testing. We always want to be helping our staff, and our participants to build vaccine confidence and to support them accessing whatever vaccines are available to them. And then using all of your great harm reduction skills to help people reduce their risks of contracting any kind of communicable disease. And that includes, but is not limited to, universal precautions for blood-borne pathogens. And then, of course, doing all the hygiene and the cleaning and the disinfecting, you know, whatever it is, you know, for COVID, but also for any other new public health emergencies that we may be called upon to manage. And then, as we talked about on the last set of slides, of course, making sure that staff understand all of these things and are trained and equipped to do what we are expecting of them. And also in there is self-care, right? So making sure that we are giving ourselves and our staff resources to put on their own oxygen masks first so that they are ready and available to be able to help the people that we serve. Okay, we're going to do another quick Zoom poll. I think that Liz is going to launch for us. All right. So give you guys a couple minutes. We are scheduled till noon today, so we will. We're going to be wrapping up shortly. We will definitely be done by noon, maybe even a little before. Also, if you've got any questions, please feel free while folks are working on the poll to throw that into chat or just to unmute and ask your question. And Liz and I are happy always to field those questions. All right, looks like almost everyone has answered the poll. So I am, oh, Liz is sharing. Okay. So the first question, all of the above, right? So all of these things are a conflict of interest. So you cannot have somebody on your staff conduct an HQS inspection if you own that property. You've got a contract with someone else to do that. You cannot rent from you cannot rent a unit from your employee's immediate family, right? You can't rent a unit if your employee owns a unit, they're a landlord. You cannot rent those units, nor can you rent units from somebody that's a member of their immediate family. And then finally, you just can't do business with your employees, right? Because it's a conflict of interest. Your employees can't be both working at your agency and benefiting through other side businesses that they have from the activities of your agency. That's a conflict of interest. So please do not use your employees' catering business to provide meals for your program. All right. And then the next set of questions, which is a violation of client confidentiality? Sharing an interesting story about a client with a coworker. Yeah, that's a violation of somebody's confidentiality, right? We should only be sharing information about clients on a need to know basis. It shouldn't be gossipy. We shouldn't be sharing it just because we think it's interesting. We should be sharing it only because that person needs to know that information in order to provide a service well to the client. So number one, definitely a violation of someone's confidentiality. Sharing information with a colleague about a client to coordinate services. No, that is not a violation of somebody's confidentiality. The next one, having a list of clients posted on a bulletin board by your desk. Yes, that is a violation of client confidentiality. You could have IDs posted, right? Things or initials posted, but you cannot have anything that is visibly at your workstation unless you are actually working on it that has confidential information. And then lastly, leaving a client file open on your desk while you step away, also a violation of confidential information. If you're stepping away from your desk, you want to make sure you close whatever that you're working on that has confidential information, and that goes both for your physical files as well as for your electronic files. So you should have on your agency's computers like timeout features that go to some sort of what do you call those things? Those screen things that go up with like a pretty picture of the mountains instead of confidential information when someone hasn't touched their computer for X amount of time. All right. So now we are going to keep going. I don't see, there's a request, Liz, I think in the chat for the slides. So if you could get that up, that'd be awesome. I'm going backwards instead of forward. Sorry about that. All right, so we're in the final stretch here. We are not going to go through all of these things in detail because we have done that in other trainings, but we did want to say that HUD does have very specific record keeping requirements and that you've got to make sure that you've got all of these things in your record. So you've got to make sure that you've got something that demonstrates that you are providing the services that you are being paid through HUD funds to provide. Normally what that is case notes, and that you are doing an assessment of people's service needs and then providing services in accordance with what it demonstrates that that person needs. You've got to make sure that your client files include your housing quality standards inspections and your lead-based paint visual assessments. And again, all of the details about that are in the housing requirements training that we did. And then you've got to make sure that you also, if you have leasing dollars or rental assistance dollars, that your files document that you are doing reasonableness determinations at least annually. That is also the requirement for HQS, that it's done at least annually. And both of those things are covered in the housing requirements training. And HUD also has rules for how long you keep those records. So the general rule is for all materials that pertain to your COC projects, you've got to maintain those records for a minimum of 5 years. For participant eligibility documentation, the rule is actually longer. So for participant eligibility documentation, you've got to maintain those records for as long as you serve that person and beyond when you serve that person. So the easiest way to think about this, that what's on the slide here is kind of HUD's complicated language that I don't know, I personally find hard to follow. So the easiest way to think about this is that you have to keep eligibility documentation until you discharge somebody and for 2 years after you discharge them, and then you can get rid of it. We always recommend this. The biggest finding always in monitoring is eligibility documentation for people who came into the program a long time ago, right? And it's the biggest recapture risk. So if you've got a program that's been around a long time and you've got people in that program that have been around a long time, we really, really, really suggest that you go into your records and you make sure that you've got eligibility documentation. So you've got disability documentation for people in PSH, and you've got homelessness documentation for everyone. No matter if they came in 1995, you still have to have that in your records. And if HUD comes and asks for it and you don't have it when they monitor you, they can recapture that money all the way back to when the person originally came in, and we don't want that to happen. If you find that you don't have those records, talk to us and we can give you some suggestions about things that you might be able to do to try and build back a record where the documentation just simply doesn't exist and you can't find it. All right. Next slide. HUD also requires, and we will ask for if we come to monitor, that your programs have an org chart, an organizational chart, so that shows, who reports to who for all of the programs that you get HUD money for, and that you also have written job descriptions for all of the staff that you are billing to the HUD grant. So obviously you guys probably all have, and you want to have written job descriptions for all of your staff positions, but we are only going to look at them, and HUD would only look at them for staff that are supported by COC funds or matching funds. And then the next thing, subrecipient monitoring. So HI, Housing Innovations, monitors subrecipients on behalf of DMIS and DOH. But for any other, if you are a recipient agency and you have subrecipients, we do have some nonprofits in CT BOSS that have subrecipient agencies. HUD requires that you monitor those subrecipient agencies, and they may ask you for documentation of that monitoring. We will ask you for documentation of that monitoring if we come and monitor you or they come and monitor you. So, and there's a couple things that you're going to need. You're going to need to show that you did some sort of risk assessment to identify where are the biggest risks, right? So, and you can use the criteria that we use for BOSS. We're happy to share those with you. And that you monitor, you make a plan for monitoring based upon that risk assessment, and then you execute that plan, you do that monitoring at least once a year, and that you retain all the documentation of that monitoring, including any findings that you had and any corrective action plans that you required, and any responses that your subrecipients gave in terms of what they're going to do to correct those findings, and that you provide that report to us at the COC and to HUD if they ask for it. And again, you don't have to submit this to us every year as a matter of course, but we will ask for it if we come out and monitor. Now, this is a lot, right? We know that this is a lot. There's nothing we can do about this. This is a HUD requirement. So what we usually suggest to people is really look carefully at whether or not you have correctly classified those agencies as subrecipients and whether they could be classified as contractors. Because if you classify them as contractors, you don't have to do this. So at the bottom of the slide, there is a link to guidance. HUD has specific definitions, of course, more requirements that say, these are the qualifications of a subrecipient, and these are the criteria of a subcontractor. So look at that, and if it's reasonable for you to classify those agencies as contractors, do that, because it's going to mean you don't have to do all this subrecipient monitoring stuff. All right. So this is, I believe, our last substantive content slide here. The rest of the stuff is just resources. So, if you've got subrecipients, you've also got to make sure that there are these specific things in your contracts or your agreements with those subrecipients. I won't go through it all. It's here for you on the slide. You want to make sure that these 3 bullets are all, that this language is in your subrecipient agreements. And again, just a reminder, it's been a long 90 minutes. Liz, at the beginning of our presentation, talked about specific requirements related to the Build America, Buy America Act that also have to be included, and those are on slide number 15. And all of you should be doing that Build America, Buy America agreement, getting all of that into your contracts with not only your subrecipients, but also any contractors that you have. And then finally, if you've got a subrecipient, HUD requires that when that subrecipient gives you an invoice or whatever system you use for them to request money from you, right, and they've followed the rules about how they're supposed to ask for that money, it's an approvable request, right, that you pay them within 45 days. That is a HUD requirement. All right, so we're going to ask you guys to do just one last really quick exercise to say, was there anything in the training today that you think your agency is not already in line with the requirements on, and that you're going to follow up on after today's training? And you can put that stuff in chat if you'd like, or you can unmute and share it. And I am, in the meantime, while you guys are thinking about that, what are the next steps after today? What are the things I'm going to go back and try to move forward after today's training? I am going to go through the rest of our resources here for you. So a bunch of times during the presentation today, we referenced other trainings that we have done. All of those trainings are listed here. The recent ones that have been done are listed here, so you can see what you may have missed, what you may want to attend, and all of them are available on our training page. We also recently did, like in the last 12 months, I'm going to say, some recommendations for training for new staff. So we know that you guys are struggling. Everyone is struggling with the labor market. You're having a hard time retaining staff, and you've got a lot of turnover. And so we're trying to make it easier for you by having all of these onboarding trainings so that when new staff come online, they're all recorded and you can have people watch the videos. And there are some recommendations about what kinds of staff should participate in which trainings, and those are linked here on this slide. And then finally, you guys have heard us say this a lot. Please, 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 if you're not already signed up for our CT Boss email list, please sign up. Make sure you choose the email list that is relevant to you. So if you are getting any kind of HUD money, either as a recipient or subrecipient, you want to choose the HUD grantees box. If you are getting if you're getting SNOFO money, our special notice of funding opportunity, our street outreach programs and other programs that get funded through the SNOFO, you want to make sure you check that box. If you're on the steering committee or just interested in knowing what's going on the steering committee, we've got an email list for that. And then finally, our YHDP grantees. So we do not keep track of all the turnover in your programs and update the email list accordingly. So when you have staff turnover in your programs, you need to make sure that the right people are signed up for the right email lists. All right. So I see there's a question, and I'm just going to put up the slide with our contact information. We are done. We'll stay and answer questions, but feel free to hop off if you'd like. And if you need to reach us, here's our contact information. All right. I think you can probably stop the recording, Liz.